Well, hello, welcome back once again, my good friends, to the RimWorld Gun Empire series, where we are wheeling and dealing weapons all the time, as well as many different types of fine wares and products, such as armor and vehicle modification kits, turrets. We got a little bit of everything, and we're going to be making a little bit more of everything today, but first, I do have a bit of a mining project under the mountain here. As I'm sure we've all seen in the previous episodes, and we could all agree, things are really beginning to heat up here, and with that, we have a good offense, but we should really think of some escape strategies out from under the mountain so that it doesn't become our tomb. As it stands currently, anyone that would want us dead, if they were to get inside this mountain, inside our home, our base, we would have to fight them off, and if we couldn't fight them off, we're basically all dead. We don't have any other way out except for the front entrance, so I'm going to dig out a side entrance that's kind of secret, but not really. The mountain is sandstone and the door is sandstone, so hopefully it blends in, but regardless, we're going to fill this small section here up with many turrets. That way we'll have a way to retreat, and the turrets should distract any enemies if they were to break in, of course. As you can see, I also created 2 layers of defense with a large turret in the front, and we could run through the doors there and get into a small hallway with 2 mini turrets that could protect us as well if it were to come to that. But of course, as I mentioned, the main focus here and the purpose of this is an escape route for us to try and get outside away from anyone inside the base. Unfortunately though, after we had completed our massive escape tunnel, I got some devastating news. It would appear that Downs has been having an affair with Rulant. Rulant apparently wooed Downs by making an observation about eels, and she's just all about eels, I suppose, and anyhow, the 2 of them are having an affair now. It's literally disgusting. Once Richard heard about the news, he got into a fist fight in the garage with Rulant, naturally of course. The 2 men were literally attempting to tear each other apart next to the Sand Viper. I made the observation of Richard bouncing Rulant's massive Neanderthal head off the side of the Sand Viper, but as mentioned, he is a Neanderthal, so he could take one hell of a punch. At the end of the day, the 2 of them got a bit tuckered out and they stopped fighting. However, this battle was far from over. Richard would make a little stop into Scott's room before going to bed, and he had a little discussion with him about Rulant and what they should do with him. Richard noted that the 2 leaders here obviously could not trust Rulant anymore. He stole Richard's wife from him. If worst came to worst, we couldn't trust that he would have our backs in a situation like that anymore. Something had to be done. That night, as Rulant lay next to Downs in Richard's bed of all places, Shinichi came into the room and immediately arrested him. Rulant's fate was sealed from the beginning. Why would he decide to do something like this? Richard and Scott are the leaders of the Gun Empire. This poor fool must think that he's indestructible. So we're going to enslave him. And the following morning, that's exactly what we did. Scott came in brandishing his rifle, having a little chat with Rulant, and of course he was enslaved shortly thereafter, not that he really had any other choice. I would then begin having them load up a few small weapons as well as Rulant into the rifle runner. I was actually going to take him out to a marshal service settlement and sell him. I was genuinely going to sell him because I was so upset. Not the characters in the game, although I'm sure they're upset as well, but Rat Knight, was so upset about this, I was going to sell him into slavery. I suppose maybe I am becoming a bit too invested. Anyhow though, we began building a road to the main road here that leads to many of the martial settlements, and during that time I began thinking to myself that maybe it actually would not be worth it to sell Rulant, as this could very much upset Downs as well as any of the mercenaries that were kind of friendly with him, stuff like that, and we really don't need an uprising. So I've decided that I may just let him stay as Scott's personal slave. He would go with him on these trading missions and things like that. And I felt like that was a pretty fair compromise all around, of course. In the meantime, back home, Richard would very angrily begin building a multi-analyzer in his wife's lab. Yes, the 2 of them are still married currently, but they are of course sleeping separately, as one might imagine. I suppose we'll have to see if they can work things out. Now that we've actually built the multi-analyzer though, we are now open to begin research on fabrication, in which we are going to do this will allow us to create many different armored structures, ammo crates, but more importantly, of course, this is actually going to open up several new different avenues for other types of research, one of which, of course, is bionic replacements, which we are going to try to finish in this episode and actually begin creating bionics to sell, as well as for our own soldiers. Sometime later, Rulant and Scott had finally returned back home in the truck, pulling into the garage with a little bit of silver. The main mission there was to build a few roads, which of course they did, but they did end up selling a few pistols and whatnot to some of the martial police officers to help them maintain order. Now that Rulant had finally returned home, I thought it might be the perfect time to give him a bit of change in apparel, if you will, so let him slip into something a little bit more comfortable, like a steel collar around his neck, and so he did. And now, of course, we'll let him get better acquainted with his new room and bed down here in the slave quarters away from everyone else. Some time later, I had Richard, and then Otto, once Richard got a little bit sluggish, began working on some car parts such as engine blocks, car suspensions, things like that we could sell for a profit. They were working on those so that we could try to sell them to the rebels. And just as well, for any of those poor rebel sap soldiers that would be walking instead of riding in some type of armored infantry vehicle or tank or something like that, we began making some metal armor so that they're at least somewhat protected. Because remember, my friends, if you plan on getting shot at, it's always better to have a piece of steel between a bullet and your fleshy soft bits. Some time later, I would begin focusing on building walls around our geothermal generator, because if you watched the last episode, like our good friend Dr. Harvey 3031, you probably realized that every time some enemies came through the area, they were beating the shit out of it, almost got destroyed, so of course we need to be able to protect it. And thank you for reminding me, by the way, Doctor, because it kind of slipped my mind, sorry about that. A little bit of time later, and it was finally time for us to set out on a major trading mission with the rebels. We were actually going to begin trading the massive stockpile of weapons that we currently have, as well as all the engine parts, car suspensions, vehicle parts in general, and the metal armors that we've been making. We've essentially been sitting on a very small fortune's worth of resources, weapons, items in general, stuff like that, and we are finally going to begin selling them to not one, but multiple rebel settlements. You may notice here as well, I started building a road at one point, and then I got a little bit bored with that because it was going to take forever, so then I just kind of drove off-road for the trading. But for obvious reasons, that wasn't too big of a deal for us. It still wasn't all that slow, as the rifle runner was basically built for off-road travel, so it wouldn't take very long for us to finish up our trading mission and get all the way back home. Scott and Rulant finally arrived back home into our territory very late at night. They were getting ready to pull the truck into the garage, but before they did that, they released their inventory, which contained 6,282 silver, 1 advanced component, and 37 normal components. We also had a few other things in our inventory, such as food, but we also bought some Chem Shine, which is basically a chem fuel moonshine, I take it, some sort of alcohol that Scott actually bought so he and Richard could celebrate their largest score yet. And celebrate they did. Boy, those rebels sure know how to make a stout liquor. After that, it was once again time for us to choose a research project. This time around, we would end up going with prosthetics. Now, prosthetics on their own are pretty useful, but of course, this is just one step to a much bigger project known as bionics. Shocking to no one, I'm sure, Downs used her major intellect and her high-tech research bench to very, very quickly finish up prosthetics. I mean, it was only within a few hours, I believe. So now we have that done, and we're going to work on bionics. Very, very exciting. Sorry, I know I keep talking about it, but it's basically the main focus of this episode, what I'd like to get done, of course. At one point, we ended up having an exotic goods trader from the Oak Foundation. This is, I think, the first actual trade caravan I've noticed from them. It would appear they're actually using pack animals, most likely, so that they don't make a big stir throughout the desert and get caught by any enemies or anything like that, I'm sure. They ended up staying here for a couple of hours, and we didn't buy anything off of them. And truthfully, I wasn't going to use this footage at all up until the point we ended up having a slaver caravan come from the Outlands, and the reason that that is important is because Big Daddy here is actually one of the #1 targets of the Oak Foundation and the rebel forces now, so I was excited to see how this was going to go. As you probably could have guessed, the outcome of these two caravans meeting was a bunch of gunfire being shot in both directions towards one another. Unfortunately for Big Daddy and his men, the Oak Foundation would actually end up using our defenses to their advantage. However, the imped slaves were somewhat holding their own by lighting the Foundation soldiers on fire whenever they could. It's actually quite sad because they're doing this to try and liberate all the slaves, and yet they're having to kill several of them in the process. After many bullets and hours ended up passing by, the Outlanders ended up losing, and Big Daddy, along with a few other members, would end up making a retreat out of the territory. However, not all of his followers were so lucky. Some of them were stuck left behind trying to fight off the Foundation, such as the Thromboian woman sniper known as Violet, who is actually a very vital part of Big Daddy's operations. Once thought to be one of the right-hand men of Big Daddy and also the muscle. Making her final stand though, she was gunned down eventually next to the small mountainside by a Foundation soldier. And so ends the story of Violet, the Thromboian slaver sniper. Her story began in the desert, and so it ended in the desert. Now, after they got done liberating all of those imped slaves, the Foundation was finally finished using our defenses and getting bullets hurled at them, so we came out to put out the fire as they began to leave the area, leaving a massive wake of bodies. Bodies, of course, that we get to haul and clean up. Thanks, guys. We did at least get all the weapons that were dropped, though, thankfully. Moving on though, we are finally going to be creating a third vehicle for our mercenaries and basically just the Empire in general here, the S&R Rifle Company. We could really use something of a tank. Now this is a sentiment that most of you guys seem to be sharing as well. I assume it has something to do with me almost getting my ass completely handed to me last episode when I let Roz get killed by that tank that the Mountain Devils were using. So yeah, we're going to build a tank here. We're actually going with one by the Vanilla Vehicles mod. This is actually a medium armored tank that goes by the name of Roadkill, but of course I'd much rather name it something that you guys choose, so be sure to leave your names in the comments section. After creating it, I done something that didn't exactly fit the music that is currently going on in the background. I decided to test how fast it is on some beggars who came here looking for medicine or something. Anyways, I tried to run them over and it didn't work. Well, we now know that this tank is very tank-like. It's not exactly extremely fast, not something that will be running people over with, I suppose, unless they're extremely close. So it's mainly going to be used for taking on any type of armored vehicles that we see, or large groups of enemies, I'm sure. Now, in other exciting news, not only did we have a new tank, but we actually had a new pet. We ended up having an iguana self-tame, and normally I just kill these creatures and eat them when this happens, like the emus and stuff, but look at the little guy, he's so handsome. I think his colors and pattern are just really cool, so of course we're going to keep him, and we're going to need a name for him as well, if you guys want to provide that. At this point, we had finally finished up bionics as our research, so I was ready to build a fabrication bench into the wall here. Unfortunately, this was interrupted by a faction assault between the Marshal Service as well as the Thromboian Union. There were a few Marshal members and a few Thromboians, and they kind of just started going at it. Nothing really of note here, except the Marshals got their asses handed to them. They absolutely wiped the floor with them. To be fair though, they were outnumbered. The one remaining soldier that survived ended up escaping, and it looks like it's time for us to clean up their little mess that they couldn't handle. There were only 3 Thromboians, 2 of them had a bow and arrow, and the other one was melee, so of course we'd come in and just start slaughtering the shit out of them with our automatic weapons. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now with those filthy savages out of our hair, we could finally finish up our fabrication bench, or at least that's what I thought. Turns out we don't actually have enough resources. We have 1 advanced component and we need 1 more, as well as some steel, unfortunately. I guess when I bought the first advanced component early on, I assumed that the fabrication bench only needed 1. I don't know, I'm not very good at math, unfortunately, but something I am very good at is trading weapons that can kill people to rebels and, people like that, of course, so that's what we're going to do for some money and also advanced components. Now you're probably asking yourself why I'm taking the Sand Viper and the tank along with us. Well, it actually turns out there's a nearby mining work site. That's probably where those Thromboians came from originally, looking here for more areas to set up mines, and they found us instead, of course. I will be honest with you though, it really doesn't matter where they came from, because when the barrel of our brand new Roadkill tank is aimed at them, there's only going to be one place that they're going. Alright, I am maybe going to retract that statement, because after we actually arrived at the mining camp, there were a lot more enemies than I had anticipated, like a lot more. I was thinking there would be about 7 to 8, and I think there's almost 30. Mind you, 30 well-trained and well-equipped warriors. It would also appear that one of them may be a mechanitor, whatever you want to call them, but they have mechs along with them. It looks like they've ripped the helmet off one of their ancient ancestors, and they're using it to control a couple of recon mechanoids. So we have that on top of the 30 well-trained tribal warriors that we would already be dealing with. But I am no coward, okay? Rat Knight is no coward. I was going to give it my best college try, but mind you, of course, I did drop out of college, so immediately after beginning to fire at them as the massive crowd of enemies began coming our way, I decided to leave. Yeah, I got a little scared and tried to run away. But cut me a little slack, okay? Their weapons do a lot of damage. Even if they are tribal, they can still take out our vehicles very, very quickly, and I didn't want to lose our tank right away. Look, listen, let old Rat Daddy here drop a little wisdom on your noggin, okay? Sometimes the best way to win a battle is by not being part of that battle at all, and that's exactly what we did here. Sure, we ran away with our tail tucked between our legs, but we could just simply buy the steel from the rebels with our advanced components, and all it is a little bit more silver, and there's not going to be any risk of us dying, of course, and that is the best part. Not too long later, though, we eventually returned home. I was having a few issues with the caravan on the world map, and then once we returned home, the tank didn't want to move at all. I thought the mod was broke, but it turns out it had too much steel on it. I'm such a silly Billy, but I figured it out. Once we finally got all 3 of these bad mamma jammas parked in the garage, we began emptying out their cargo bins, and we had a bunch of silver and steel and a few other bits and bobs, but the most important, of course, was the advanced components, and now we could finally begin working on our fabrication bench, which Scott promptly began working on for us, thankfully. It took him a hot moment. I was kind of afraid he was going to fail, but he has a very high construction skill, so I figured we should be good. Once that was finished, though, it was Richard's time to shine. Obviously, of course, Richard here is always doing our smithing and our crafting and our tailoring because he has such good skills, but I do find it extremely symbolic that he is the one who is building our very first bionic body part, as well as him being a co-founder. It just makes everything so much better. What makes it even more better and symbolic, in my opinion, is the fact that this was a bionic lung that we were actually going to install in Richard himself. As you can see, though, it is worth a lot of money, and maybe it would have been a better idea to sell this first bionic body part, but how are we going to know it truly works unless we install it, right? It would be very unethical if we just sold off these bionics not knowing if they would even be compatible for people, and who better to be our guinea pig, patient, than Richard himself. If he truly trusts his own craftsmanship, then there should be nothing to worry about. And thankfully, after a few strenuous hours of surgery, the bionic lung was finally installed. I never had a doubt in my mind. Well, maybe a few doubts, seeing how Richard is also one of our best doctors, but that's alright, it worked. Now, those among you with a keen set of peepers probably saw earlier that the bionics themselves actually require advanced components to be made, so we actually need to research a way to go about constructing our own advanced components, which would be much cheaper than buying them. Now, I'm what you might call a little silly Billy, and I wasn't really paying attention when I chose the advanced fabrication research tree, and for some reason I guess I thought that I would have to build a brand new production bench. So of course I wanted to try and build a larger battery room and add some new batteries so we could store more power, because I thought it was going to suck up more power. But really, we needed to do this anyways because there are plenty of other different research trees that will have new production benches that will suck up that power. What's that? You're tired of hearing me yap about useless stuff like batteries and power? Okay, let's move on. I caught Richard outside lifting boulders over his head, so I assumed he was doing a lot better, and yes, it would turn out that the bionic lung was making him feel pretty good, you know, he was breathing fine and he was doing well. I suppose these products are now ready for the market. Now, I saw a few comments on the last episode telling me that I needed to build mortars, and I've actually got some of these anti-aircraft guns. Well, currently I actually have one, but I am going to attempt to build another one here, as well as kind of expand our food storage area just a teeny bit. I think I had mentioned it before, but I'll go over it once again. These anti-aircraft guns actually do function as mortars as well, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe they're actually actually quite a bit more accurate. But uh-oh, what's this? It looks like we need components, and we are all out. Oh, shucks, dang it, I guess we're gonna have to go buy some. Ha! Gotcha, you fools. With fabrication, we can actually make our own components. This is a big step up, mostly because I was getting so damn sick and tired and having to drive all the way to a settlement to get components. It sucked. Now the only issue that we're really going to be running into is steel, which is required for components and stuff, but I will figure it out later. Because as for right now, friendos, me, you, and Machu here have an anti-aircraft gun to finish up, and so we did. Hopefully we don't have to worry about using these bad boys anytime soon, but if we do need them, they're here. But for right now, I want to take a hot moment and discuss a new mod that I am actually going to be adding to the series here. So this is the Setup Camp mod. What this will allow us to do is set up a temporary camp on the world map. Now, there are a lot of different reasons that I want to use this mod. For one, I feel like it's pretty realistic, right? I think that our people would be able to set up temporary camps at any point that they would like while on the world map. To me, that just kind of makes sense. But the main reason that I want to add this is because, like I was discussing earlier, we're going to be running into some problems with resources, mainly, of course, steel in particular, because it's required for components and things like that. So using this to set up camps in mountainous areas, we will be able to have our colonists there begin mining and, load it up into the truck or whatever vehicle and then bring it all the way back home for production. To me, that also makes more sense. We would be doing that instead of constantly buying these resources off of other factions, because we don't want to be reliant on any other faction for our resources. We want them to be reliant on us, of course. And now with all that being said, we're actually going to be testing out the mod here. We have Scott and Ninal who are going to be setting up a temporary camp in a temperate forest for the night. Now, of course, this is not for steel. We're actually going to be collecting some concrete from some ruins that are here, as well as cutting down a lot of trees for wood. The concrete, of course, I just plan on using for some asphalt roads for our vehicles back at the base. Now, the wood, though, with the trees and everything, that's going to be fuel, and I also have a few construction projects in mind, and of course, what little cacti we harvest back home we use for fuel, so this is going to be very useful for not having to rely on other factions for chem fuel as well. If you can't tell, in this episode, I'm really trying to get to bionics, which we did, and after that, I'm really just trying to become self-sustaining with our base and whatnot, because we really need to do that. But of course, we are on the right path. It just takes a little bit of time. We'll get there. Now that we're back home, though, we're going to drop off all this smorgasbord of wood that we've collected. Now, the main focus of this wood is actually going to be to help us improve our defenses, particularly around these barricades and sandbags and things like that. That's going to help us with cover, but what if we have, say for example, another small or even a large tank that just rolls right over those, right? So we're actually going to build some wooden tank traps that should prevent that from happening. I do think this is going to be pretty useful for us from, preventing larger vehicles from coming across our barricades and stuff like that and just coming straight into the base. My only concern is that these are made of wood. We get a lot of fires down this way during raids, and it's going to be one big box of kindling, I suppose. Of course, though, with that being said, there is a very low chance of them actually catching anything on fire if we add in a new turret that will blast them from very far away and will kill them before they even get the chance to light anything on fire. Well, I'm not building one of those. I'm building one of the same ones that we have, but this time around I'm going to put some embrasures around it. Furthermore, of course, I'm actually going to be deconstructing a lot of the barricades that we've placed around our previous turrets, and I'm going to begin putting embrasures around those as well. This is something that really I should have done early on, as we've had this technology unlocked for quite a while. Embrasures actually have a much higher cover effectiveness than barricades, so it will help keep our turrets more protected from gunfire and whatnot. Of course, the cover effectiveness also applies to our people, so if when we're in a gunfight we want to stand behind the turrets, that might be our best option now. And at this point we're kind of coming down to the end of the video, so I'm just going to begin doing some miscellaneous improvements around the base. One thing that I've been wanting to do for a while is fix this other entrance for our vehicles on the eastern side of the base. I absolutely hated how it looked before. It looked very thin. It looked like they could literally just tear through it at any given moment, and That's kind of still the case if they were to tear through the actual garage door, but I just like the design of this better. It's a bit thicker and it feels more protected to me. Not to mention, of course, I added in more of these beautiful floor lamps to really give it that gorgeous glow, and honestly this does make sense. It would help them drive through since it's kind of a tunnel and it's very dark. Now of course, while we're still on the topic and theme of miscellaneous improvements around the base, I began adding some gorgeous slate tile flooring as well as some of those floor lamps into our growing zones that are under the base. I know some people really enjoy the aesthetics of RimWorld and building a beautiful base and stuff like that, and some people don't, so I apologize if this last little bit here working on stuff like this isn't exactly your jam, but I really enjoy doing it, and I think that it turned out really well in the end. To be honest with you, I don't really know why, but this really gives me Institute from Fallout 4 vibes for some reason. I guess just because it was underground and we're under a mountain maybe, I don't know. I also want to take a hot moment here and just share the gorgeous sight of this snowy, icy sand of the desert here. If memory serves correctly, this is actually the first time that we've seen a snow stick on the desert floor since we've been here. For me, little events and moments like these just really make the series come to life. The following evening, though, of the next day, we would actually begin working on another large project under the base. This time around, I'm actually going to make a separate section here next to our production area for our armory, where we're going to be storing all the weapons, modification kits, armors, everything that we've been making thus far, and more things, of course, that we're adding onto our inventory. I also felt that we really needed to do this because as we add more production areas, we're going to need a lot more space, and we're kind of running out of new areas in our production room unless we just tear into a few bedrooms, which also is a possibility if need be. Then I was thinking to myself, before we really start selling a lot of these bionics and start trying to mass produce them, I should make sure that all of our people here are well taken care of in terms of their body parts. And I took a look at Shinichi, and boy oh boy is he having a rough time. He has a mangled scar in his right eye, his left femur is shattered, and he's missing a finger. So I thought maybe we should take care of him first. So naturally, of course, we began having Richard whip up a brand new bionic leg for him, and we were actually going to install a glass eye because I didn't have enough advanced components to make a bionic eye, at least for now. These bionics do take quite a while to make, I will note that. Something I think would be good later on is increasing someone like Richard's manipulation through bionics so that this process goes faster. I think Richard would be the perfect candidate for a set of bionic arms as well. Of situations like this, he's making bionics, but he's also performing surgeries. Manipulation would be a very good thing to have. His new bionic leg went in just fine without any issues, and then we would actually begin working on his glass eye, and after about an hour or so of surgery on that, it went well as well. Now, I will say though, I am glad we have the glass eye, but it does decrease his eyesight. The mangled scar actually had him with some better eyesight than a glass eye does, but it was aching and was going to cause him to constantly have a mood debuff, so it was no bueno. At this point, Richard is truly becoming a connoisseur of these bionic body parts. I'm sure these tales of surgeries and his new creations will be told far and wide, hopefully making people want to buy plenty of them from us. But my friends, I want to thank you all ever so much for watching today's episode. Sorry there wasn't all that much action in this episode. There was a little bit of action just before I decided to run away from the mining work site. I hope we all understand why I was a bit of a coward there. I really did not want to lose any of our vehicles. I do hope to get a true and good test in with the tank, maybe at another mining work site or a raid, or at some point we may end up trying to raid some other faction settlements such as the Mountain Devil Mafia. At some point, we might turn on the Slavers. I don't know. They seem to, be having some political issues with one of the two main factions that we've been trading with. So we, of course, would not dare begin to pick any sides or anything like that. But it very well may be good if the rebels think that that's something that we're doing, or if we could do something small like that to appease them against a very tiny faction in the Outlands. But let me know what you guys think about that in the comments, of course. I really appreciate you guys always leaving comments and suggestions and things like that, and just giving me your feedback on the series and what you guys would like to see throughout the episodes. I really think that that makes the series even better. I mean, it really does. It makes it so much better that you guys are putting your input in and that I am using that input to, just try and make it more of your series, our series, of course. I know I say that a lot with a lot of my series, but I truly do feel like this one, as well as our Eternal Winter series, which is ongoing as well, which you guys should watch if you haven't already. You know, I do feel like these series are ours, and I really, that's, you know, probably one of my favorite things about them, of course. I do apologize that this episode was a teeny tiny bit shorter than the last few that I have been making. I'm just trying to get this one out to you guys as soon as I can. There wasn't a lot of action going on throughout this episode, unfortunately, either, but I do feel like we have made a lot of great improvements onto the base, and mostly with our research throughout this episode. We've researched quite a lot of projects, and we've really made just a speed run towards bionics, which is amazing. Once again, though, guys, thank you ever so much for watching. I love you guys ever so much, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.